So welcome to the panel on Mind and Magic. We have some very interesting talks lined up this morning. And we're starting with Vanessa Sinclair. She's a psychoanalyst and a clinical psychologist in New York, founding member of das Unbehagen, a free association for psychoanalysis, facilitating psychoanalytic lectures and classes and events around New York City. She curates a series on psychoanalysis, art and the occult at Morbid Anatomy Museum in Brooklyn and contributes to a variety of publications. The title of her talk today is Third Mind Work and Pandrogeny, and I will hand over to Vanessa, who will, I think, give us something very interesting.
The floor is yours. Hi. Can everyone hear me? Is this on? Yes. Yeah? Is it working? Yes. Okay, great. So I'm Vanessa Sinclair, and this is part of my practice doing these talks, specifically the talks on cut-ups. As you can see, my mentors are there, Brian Geisen and William S. Burroughs. But because they're part of my ritual practice, I start them with an invocation. And I've made this oil. I'm a witch, as well as a psychoanalyst. And I create oils, specifically oils for people who have passed on. And this is an oil that I created specifically for the third mind work to facilitate it. I worked on it from Brian Geisen's Day of Death to William Burroughs' Day of Death, actually with my partner, Caitlin Foisey. She's the one that I do the third mind work with. And we both worked on our own oils separately. And then after William Burroughs' Day of Death, we combined the two, creating the third mind oil. So I just anointed myself with it. I'm going to pass it around. You're welcome to, if you'd like, usually on the third eye or where you speak. But you can touch it, smell it, do whatever you'd like. Or you don't have to. And to begin, there's a cut-up. This cut-up I created actually early last year. I moved into a new home after a few years of kind of chaos and moving around a lot. And when I went into the home before I moved in to cleanse it and consecrate it, I didn't bring my usual tools. I decided just to see what I would decide to do once I arrived there. And what I decided to do was make a cut-up. So I had one paper with me that I wrote about Pandrogeny and polymorphous perversity, which is actually in the Fenris Wolf 8 that just came out. And I cut up my own paper and made this cut-up out of it. And this is what it says. Ourselves and based on you ever. Identity ego is first formed during. The child experiences herself and the mirror. The mirror image appears. Sexuality is a force of nature that yourself be possessed by. In New York City. Currently representing via our bodies. Consider object. Geisen and Burroughs showed the cutting up of language creates the space for something. Slowly, third being embodies countless numbers. Polymorphous perversity. Transsexual. Pandrogeny is divine. A being possessed, repossess. As these sites are relaxation. We are simply sexual. Repression apparent. Vanessa Sinclair. Psychoanalysis. The pores of the skin. We learn about as these are the constricted to nor constructed, penetrated and expel, and biology are limited. How anymore, only contained, as self, every self, it is the object, dropped, not heterosexual, homosexual. Sexuality is not in the realm by either. The unconscious sexuality, third mind. So I decided for this academic occult conference that I would not write an academic paper because I felt like I could speak to you all more freely about my process. And I wanted to show, well, to give you a little background, I'm running on the assumption that everybody already knows what cut-ups are and the work of Burroughs and Geisen. But for those who don't, to give you a little background, The cut-up technique started with Tristan Tzara during the Dada movement, and he called them accidental poems. He would just cut a bunch of words together and throw them into a hat and then pull out each individually and lay them out. And he said that once you do this, the poem itself reflects you. And that's something you really find. And Burroughs and Geisen picked this back up in the 50s. Brian Geisen rediscovered the technique at the Beat Hotel in 1959 and showed it to William Burroughs, who ran with it, obviously. And the two worked on their third mind work together for decades. In 1978, they had a book called The Third Mind that they put out, that they described the cut-up technique in detail. They showed not only their process, but the actual cut-ups and what they... can you put the thing back? Sorry. They showed the third mind process by talking about their process and how they put different cut-ups together, and then would show examples of the different cut-ups that they created. And the thing that you see once you do this as a daily practice, which I have been for a couple of years now, is that, say, looking at Burroughs' work as a teenager and in my 20s, I thought it was really interesting. Obviously, William Burroughs was really onto something, but I didn't really do it myself. And once I started doing it myself and seeing how it is really life-transforming, I look back at his films now and his videos, and he's not just reading these to people, he's asking everyone to participate. He's trying to explain to everyone that you can all do this. You don't have to be an artist per se. You can cut up your own writing. You can cut up other people's writing if you don't write yourself. You can do it with collage work, with anything really. And as a magical practitioner, you realize after a while that it's actually a divination technique or a magical technique as well. One of the funny things that we were talking about earlier with Alkitsis was Carl Abramson and I did this conference in May here in London, or down in London, on psychoanalysis, art, and the occult. And my partner, Caitlin Foisey, was telling the story of how she met Patti Smith and Jim Carroll after being obsessed with them and cutting their writing with her writing. And when she was explaining me this story last year and how she felt like by cutting their writing together with her writing, she actually brought them into her life in this way. So it's not just an artistic technique to see what occurs on the page, but it actually can bring things into your life and manifest things. And when she was telling me this story last year, I realized all the people I had invited and that had accepted to come to the conference that we had in May were all people whose writing I admired, and they were all in this cut-up box that I had in my house. So I started looking at things differently at that point, because before then, since I am a psychoanalyst, I've had years of training beaten into me, and even though I was a magical practitioner, I never really thought of these things in that way, and I thought of them as more like techniques to uncover the unconscious. What the difference is between the unconscious and this, I can't really say. That's something I'm working with, but they could be equivalent, I'm not sure. But especially with working with like the dead or spirits specifically, I always thought of people that worked with spirits or entities of the land and that sort of thing as kind of working with parts of their own mind. And now after working with this and working with spirits, specifically the dead, I don't resonate so much with spirits of the land and that sort of thing, but I really resonate with the dead and doing necromancy. So once I started experiencing this myself, I realized now my perspective is that it's really narcissistic of psychologists to think that all of this is just in our mind, and that there aren't other entities coming from the outside that we're interacting with. So I pulled up a few cut-ups because what I wanted to focus on today was showing you how different they are depending on what you're cutting into them, and the different kind of messages that you receive depending on what fodder you're using. So to start, I'm actually going to read a little cut-up I did of Alkitsis' work because she just spoke and she's so fantastic. And this is a paper that she gave at the conference in May, and just a snippet of what it's like when you cut up one person's work together. Because it's still, like, for example, when I cut up my own work, it's still your own ideas, but it's your ideas rearranged in a way that you wouldn't necessarily have arranged them, so it can give you inspiration for new ways of thinking about your own ideas. So this is from Alkitsis' paper. System, in buto, body of flesh, or as opposed to kinesthetic sensorium and generative of. The threshing floor is a key, buto, sabbatic dance, and in practice situating both, erotic energy, it engendered by the immerses one in teachers, the late, one touches and the corpse makes. And then another story from the conference, since I'm on that track. So Val Denham, who I'll show you her work. This is Venus Castina by Val Denham. And she was kind of the star of our conference in May. She's the only person that showed artwork and gave a paper and performed. And this painting was kind of our icon. It was on the cover of everything. And I fortunately I get to own her now. But the reason that I invited Val to the conference in the first place, I didn't know her at all, but we were Facebook friends, as we are with everyone. And I actually had a dream about her. I tend to have these dreams where I'm in my own house, but my house is kind of these tunnels of rooms. And I was in one of these house tunnel rabbit holes, and I was in the kitchen trying to organize everything for everyone. I do a lot of events, so I'm doing that kind of thing a lot. And my friend's husband, Simon Critchley, was at the end of the tunnel in this auditorium, and he was giving a paper, and he was about to finish. And I realized I had to get to him to thank him and introduce the next speaker. So I started running down this tunnel of rooms, and it's like everyone in my life was flying by, and I was kind of pushing them all the way, like, I have to get up there. So I ran through my whole life in front of me, and I got up to the stage, and I thanked Simon. And then I said, and next we have Val Denham. And she stood up out of the audience, and the spotlight shone on her, and she came up to the stage. So I woke up, and I was like, Val lives in England, and maybe she wants to come to the conference, right? So I invited her, and she said yes, and she ended up coming, and like I said, was the star of the show. Then when I got back from England in May, Val actually had a dream about me. And I won't go into the details of that dream, but what I decided to do was to cut up, I hand wrote the dream I had originally had about her, and then she had sent me the dream that she had about me, and I printed it out, and I cut them together, and this is the result of that. Dream is a thank him and a gray rabbit. I say, listen, we can have the cake. Take me far from earth and here, to kiss your paw, that it never ends. I had to. You are lying on the floor. Him and stage thanked everyone. Okay. Then the next one I want to share. So Caitlin Foisey and I are working on a book currently in homage to The Third Mind by Burroughs and Geisen. And in order to kind of get it started, I made a cut-up of her writing with my writing, with Robert Ansel's writing, because FULGUR is going to be the one putting it out. And this is to sort of consecrate the process and get it beginning. And it's on a picture of Burroughs and Geisen. By the voice of the act or feat, Burroughs, the 100%, these interests, occult groups, he stepped foot in creating, merging ideas, identity. We, by the ancient voice, ego identity is ears, sound pictures, words, words, word in words, the role of the father, the future with large, the birth of air travel and meaning for you. Allow lyrics from the song in begin with the to chaos magic. Burrow. The mother, I, as the big other too, one's own, cutting in a refreshing new way. sprinkled islands, we stand. We gather here today on dimensions, while incantation spelled William S. Burroughs and the third mind, Caitlin Foisey, Sinclair separately, directly from the I've read so many, identify with and the manipulation of a variety of phenomena. Cards may be of language, a thee and the word, like tilt or valise. Cut up created work in this way. We'll also explore toward identity, picture between your to the audience. I'm so used to doing these talks not as a lecture, but as kind of a cut in themselves, because usually when I give them, I tell the audience they can cut in at any time and ask me questions instead of having to wait for the end. So yeah, I'm used to you just spontaneously cutting in. I don't know if we could do it that way, but anyway. I did do a cut-up specifically for this conference, which I just lost the place of. But I wanted to read it to you. Oh, that one's really good, too. I love them. One of the other things I did, so I work with Briar Peorge, specifically with Lady J. Briar Peorge. We have the same birthday, and I created an oil for her as well, which I have here. And around our birthday this year, I did a series of cut-ups, cutting together. See, I'll find that one right away, of course. I did a series of cut-ups, cutting together an interview that Carl Abramson did specifically with her only, and I cut it together with writing of mine. And I guess I'm going to read that instead of the one I planned, Jay. So Jay's very active, and I have an oil for her too, and I'll pass that around as well. This one smells really, really good. Sorry, I'm really into my oils. Okay. I'd say, if we represent this, and this way creating space where we are able to create, is this the best way of expressing an idea? Way we might imagine them to be. The more like, if that's what you felt first, the same. A transitional space where one is, fuck them, it's not your problem. You, or a variable length of time, depending too much. You express yourself the way you occur once, twice, or 3 times. Figure it out. Tell them it's not my job to. While Sigmund Freud sat with his public education, you know, you have to from the daily narrative, a time when one, following different avenues of thought, striking various nodal points, signifiers, cemented self, and relate this to the idea of the soul, varying but concurrent realities. One speaks of a unified soul that transfers from to get the point across, and he is the soul, actually not one coherent self. What sense of a soul is also a fantasy or illusion? If for, with your guts, and if people don't get it, end up in 2 or more bodies. This could be, keep telling me, I can't worry about that. Lady J. Briar Peorage, and therefore, when you want to, and leave it to them to finding their other half. This could be educate the public. You've had a lot of in Plato's Symposium, of which I will get that out of you. In the third mind, Burroughs notes that artist we call our censor decides not only what will conscious mind, however altered it is in, often state that their best shots, works, ideas, also mask stimuli from the environment, come out of nowhere. Many best works were when an alarm clock becomes a fire. Writing is cut-ups, but that writers had no way of evacuating the building. Similarly, when method was delineated, one cannot will, spontaneous, active, and is more or less consciously, factor of unpredictability that is truly generative. Do you see how it's speaking? I hope you do. I do. This concept of the ratio or continuum, dream-wake states and conscious-unconscious, the other side, or if you're not wearing your glasses, sexuality and femininity. To some dream you experienced, or the train. Perhaps you engaged in sexual activity this morning. Whatever the case may be, whichever parts of us, every sort, photographers, painters, writers, variations, and will always be differences. It is in of the sort of inspiration that seem to spaces that something new grows. And when you accidents, Burroughs explains that in fact, all various arrangements of the scenes of your life, recreating this accident until the cut-up, recreation, a collage. But the cut-up method does introduce more aggressively expresses my creativity. The ritual takes us out of our day-to-day lives, minds, something more willful, 'cause it was, make the baby, you know, you deliver, giving us an opportunity to invent our lives, the certain amount of time. Space created in the analytic session is much, taken out of one's daily routine, seems like it suited me, and it was fine. There, on the analyst's orientation, this ritual may occur. Classical analysts see patients 4 to 5 days, analysans 6 times a week. A ritual extraction may rewrite one story by venturing back into pathways, meandering through the unconscious, sliding into one another, splintering off into. It's fine. And in this separation, the space for creation, void to fill. Repetition is unexact, and where change may come into play. Small, new, in turn altering the system, scaffolding of the creative space. There were 2 people working on that, perhaps, and now we've just gotten to the point. Okay, I'll stop there.
And thank you very much for that, Vanessa. So, questions, we have about 6 minutes.
Kind of an observation and a question. I was aware that Burroughs and Geisen had quite a misogynist agenda with their use of cut-ups to create without the use of a woman, without having a woman involved. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you and Caitlin are doing it as women and you don't have to use this idea. But I also find it interesting that you use a box and boxes, which has a sexual connotation, and that you put these words in your boxes. And I didn't know if Burroughs and Geisen used that technique or if that's something you do. And I also wondered whether there's some awareness of time process too, because you can be instant with a cut-up and cut something, make something immediately, or whether you could put something in a box and then, I guess, put it into time, like lunar cycles and things, and work with those energies and then see what emerges after certain periods or after certain astral influences, seemingly, perhaps shaking it and energizing it that way, and what difference about what comes out of the box in the creative process. Just thoughts.
No, absolutely. I think, first of all, it's really important that Caitlin and I are doing the work. So it's Burroughs and Geisen. My lineage is Burroughs and Geisen, and then Jen and Jay, and then Caitlin and I. And I think it's important because, like you said, Burroughs did write about kind of bypassing the need for women at all. And he had some whole paranoid, crazy thing that I can't read when I get to those parts of his works because it makes me hate him. And I love him. But yeah, no, I agree. I do think, not to get into my whole philosophy, but I do think that creating third minds is a way to kind of speed up human evolution and bypass biological reproduction. I think that when you form, a lot of times, I'm sure all of us at one point have been in a relationship with someone, and it's so hard to let it go, even when you see that it's really problematic after a while. And I think part of the reason that is because you have created this kind of third mind or life, and you can see where it's going. And Burroughs and Geisen said that third mind kind of takes on a life of its own. And I think letting go of that, or having it die, is really hard. But I could definitely see with working with Caitlin, it's a strange experience. And even working with Lady J, there's this, even how you described in your dancing, you're there, but there's this part of you that's the other as well, and you're kind of aware of both parts. And it's hard to explain, I guess, unless you've experienced it. But I do think that if anybody who's intelligent enough and creative enough to understand these kinds of concepts and want to do this work with another person to create a third mind or being, which could be a little baby or a golem or whatever you want, demon or whatever you want to call it, I think that would make a lot of really interesting other people consciousnesses going out into the world. Whereas when you birth a child, no offense to anyone birthing children, but the child has to grow up and kind of go through what all humans have gone through to get to a certain point. And it kind of bypasses that. So I think it does have a lot of potential in that way. And I definitely love the idea of the box, and I put all these things into my box, and then they grow. And I started with one huge cut-up box, but it's kind of gotten out of control. And so I bought all these smaller boxes, antique boxes, and now I'm intentionally putting certain pairings together and seeing how they work. And when I create the oils, I do work on them and put cut-ups in them, usually of that person's writing or my writing with that person's writing, and do it on lunar cycles or birth to death dates and things like that. So.
We only have time for one more question. So, is there someone in the back? Can't actually see very well from here, I'm afraid. Any more questions? No?
Nope.
Going? Going? Okay. Thank you very much, Vanessa.